But first, if a week is a long time in politics, 6 weeks is an eternity. And that's how long the government has been reeling from a succession of sexual assault and, in recent days, seedy revelations, all taken to mean that it's got a problem with women. And where it isn't women, like the men doing the wrong thing in the office, at the very least, it runs an operation in Canberra of which no one can be proud. Each claim, Brittany Higgins, Christian Porter, and now the debauched Gang of Four and their utter contempt for the women MPs they're supposed to work for, well, each case is different and separate, but they've coalesced in the public mind to create the strong impression of a government that's lost control, a government not focused on people, and a parliament that, frankly, is an embarrassment. So how has this happened? Why is the government now being fitted up as indifferent to women and responsible for sleaze when Prime Minister Scott Morrison, whatever you think of him as a politician, leads an exemplary personal life and has no more women than anyone else, high numbers of women, in his cabinet? Think about it. Who's making the case for the prosecution? Penny Wong, Tanya Plibersek and Christina Keneally. Okay, and who's making the case for the defence? Well, essentially, it's just Scott Morrison. Maybe coalition women are making the case too, but they're all but invisible and inaudible. In fact, the only coalition woman who's made any real impact over the past few weeks has been Nicole Flint. And she's leaving the parliament because of the incessant attacks from Labor's campaign arm GetUp that no Labor woman repudiated at the time. And even since calling it out, Flint has barely had any coverage, has she, in media outlets like the ABC. Indeed, nothing better exposes the selectiveness of so much of this outrage than the sisterhood's silence when the victim was a Conservative woman like Flint. But to get back to the government's fundamental problem, how can you refute the claim that the Liberal Party has an issue with women when the case is being made by Labor women of political consequence and it's not being countered by Liberal women of equal political consequence? Again, whatever you think of her, when Julia Gillard made her notorious misogyny speech against Tony Abbott, the counterattack was led by Julie Bishop, who is the long-serving Deputy Liberal leader, had earned the right to be taken seriously and listened to with respect. And I'll also say again, as I do whenever I talk about that misogyny speech, let's never forget, this was a speech on a motion to repudiate Peter Slipper's derogatory smut about female genitalia, and Gillard, so desperate for his vote in the House, well, she defended it. But back to the absence of vocal Liberal women now. If Marise Payne, Morrison's Minister for Women, has been leading the counter-attack for the government over the past 6 weeks, it obviously hasn't made much of a dent. And why would it? Because even though Payne's been in Cabinet for 5 years and Parliament for well over 2 decades, she's been wearing a bit of an invisibility cloak. And not 1 in 50, I reckon, could pick her in a lineup. There's Linda Reynolds and Michaelia Cash, both of whom are caught up in the Brittany Higgins claim, so they can't effectively mount much of a defence for the government, even if they had the heft to do so. Then, of course, there's Susan Lee and Karen Andrews, capable enough ministers to be sure, but instead of forcefully explaining that the Higgins claims are now before the police, as they should be, and that Christian Porter must be afforded the presumption of innocence, as Bill Shorten was, and that, of course, those desk masturbators are now being weeded out, these two women are raising the red herring of quotas, which has the Liberal base already worried about Morrison's lack of ticker on the values fight, ready to tip over the edge. The basic issue here is that it's not enough about women in the Parliament and women in Cabinet. It's also that these people have to be women and men of substance and conviction, capable of making a real mark on our public life. Aside from Flint, who the PM sidelined into the whip's office, the only woman who seems capable of really mixing it in the cut and thrust of public life, I have to say, Assistant Minister Amanda Stoker, is still a bit too junior to counter the likes of Wong, Plibersek and Keneally on her own, although I'll say of Amanda Stoker, she's got an intellect that matches all three combined. I've rarely had so many dyed-in-the-wool Liberals contact me frustrated at the government's inability to get traction, as I have in recent weeks. Frustrated at the government's paralysis and a real concern that the Prime Minister's political savvy has abandoned him here, and the panic is starting to set in. It's one thing to have women in the ranks, as I said, but what's needed is a female champion capable of being the warrior that every party needs. And here's another question. How many warriors does this government have, female or male? All the while, Anthony Albanese, a beleaguered opposition leader on the way out just a few weeks ago, well, he's got a very positive pro-Labor federal redistribution under his belt, and with that, he's inching closer to the lodge. I can hear you. The Morrison government, yes, is better than the alternative. But let me tell you, it'll take a lot more than that alone to win the election.